Hello and welcome to our next session, which is on access in rail. So we'll be discussing a little bit further about the operators outside of the GBR orbit in the next 10 to 15 years as we move on. So I just want to introduce our guests. To my left is Peter Graham. You want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. My name's Peter Graham. I'm the Policy and Government Affairs Director at Freightliner. Thank you, Rich, for the invitation today.
Hi, guys. So I'm Stuart Jones, the Managing Director at First Rail Open Access. So that covers Lumo and Hull Trains.
And I'm Geoff Hobbs. My job title for Transport for London is Director of Public Transport Service Planning. And that bit of jargon means I do the timetables for all public transport, underground, overground, Docklands Light Railway, Elizabeth Line trams, and, controversially in this place, buses.
Oh, shan't be talking about them today, Geoff, I'm afraid.
I'm looking forward to Bus Live.
You'll be waiting a long time. So, first question. I wanted to actually get into a little bit more about the GBR license and the safeguards that you guys need in that. You know, GBR will be managing both infrastructure and its own passenger services. So there is a real danger, isn't there, that we're going to see the structural separations internally may not necessarily be there. So what would you want to see written into the license to guarantee that the access planning teams are taking your voice and your concerns and your needs on board?
Shall I go first on it? Yeah. So we are expecting, I think, to see a draft license for GBR in the autumn. So we haven't had much sort of engagement on that to date. Obviously, it's going to be an absolutely crucial document in terms of it's going to outline the sort of parameters by which the ORR are holding GBR to account on and the areas that are being monitored and measured by the ORR. So from a freight perspective, I mean, there's a few things in the license that we'd expect to be seeing. First is around assets stewardship. So, you know, we need sort of confirmation that GBR will be maintaining network capability to the published standards. So, you know, from freight, we're talking about route availability, we're talking about gauge, those sort of things. We absolutely have to be crystal clear that in the license there is an obligation on GBR to maintain that network capability. That's absolutely going to be absolutely fundamental. There's also the point, of course, that GBR are going to be fundamentally different from Network Rail in so much as they are going to be the largest individual passenger operator on the network. So they're going to be a train operator in the future model. And therefore, we need some assurance that GBR are not set up in competition with the private freight operators. You know, there's nothing in the legislation that would directly preclude that, but we would expect to see that in the license. So we'd expect to see the license preclude GBR from setting up in direct competition in that sense. And that would be inappropriate given the fact that GBR, of course, will not be paying track access charges, and they will be, won't be subject to the performance regime, and they won't be subject to the other sort of industry parameters. The third bit I'd point out on the license is around safeguards around land. So at the moment, you know, there are strategic freight sites up and down the country, and they're vitally important because they're homes for our customers, homes for us. So that's how we sort of, you know, set up new terminals, new facilities. The license needs to sort of pull in the fact that these strategic freight sites, at the moment, the safeguards for that exist in the Railways Bill. That part of the Railways Bill does fall away under GBR. That bit, so those protections then need to get embedded back in to the system, and we'll be looking for the license to provide those safeguards when it comes to land and to have like very, very clear parameters on that safeguarding.
Yeah, I think, Rich, the two key things which we're looking for is obviously the access to the network. We know that the proposals are for the access to be moving away from the regulator, the ORR, over to GBR to essentially manage all types of access to the network. And so I think what we want to understand is how our non-GBR operators can be treated fairly in that process, particularly when we're up against a GBR operator potentially going for the same path. So that's the crux of what we're really looking to see is how can that be transparent and be fair non-discriminately. The secondary piece, which we're really interested in seeing how that evolves, is how the track access charging piece works, because it's all very well getting access to the network, but we want to make sure that we're not into a position where we essentially get charged off the network. So it's making sure that the charging works in a fair, proportionate way. proportionate to the size of market that the operation is covering.
And is that something you think you've got right now?
I think it's worked pretty well. I think that's evolved over time. We saw in control period 6 the introduction of the infrastructure capacity charge. An infrastructure capacity charge is put onto operators where they have the ability to pay that, where they're essentially they're serving big enough markets. So, for example, on Lumo, serving London to Edinburgh, a reasonable sized market, that's right that there's an infrastructure capacity charge introduced there. So we pay on that, circa £5 per train mile, which is as much as any other operator on the network, if not more. Meanwhile, somewhere like Hull Trains is slightly different because the markets aren't the same scale as the London Edinburgh, and the purpose of that operation is really trying to ensure that the Hull and Humberside has that connectivity and it's connected into not only the East Coast Main Line but into London. So it's a slightly different model, and so it's just making sure that when we get more sight on the charging, that it's not a one-size-fits-all approach, that it proportionately takes the markets that it's serving.
Geoff?
Some similar themes, really, to Graham and Stuart. We are very worried about transparency. The nature of GBR, it will be a big beast, and it will have its stresses and strains, particularly given the very overt requirement for them to have all sorts of cost savings, quite rightly too, to reduce subsidy. And that means that its management will behave as managements do, perfectly rationally, but they might not be welcoming to the same extent third-party operators, such as Transport for London. So we have a quarter of all national rail trips on the Elizabeth Line and London Overground, so it really matters to the operation of London. And we're very keen to know where we stand in that and to make sure that the access that we have now will be available into the future. Now, there's a certain amount of stuff on the website, and there's some lovely flow diagrams, and it all looks perfectly sensible. But it's the how that lives and breathes. And it all looks a little bit top-down at the moment. I'd really like to see the accountability to be bottom-up as well. And to enable that, some of the sorts of things I'd like to see is data, for example, the data on performance and capacity utilization, things of this nature that gives, at a very, very detailed level, service group level, and high latency turns up straight away, such that we can see what's going on in detail at localities in close to real time. And that means things, it all gets a bit techie thereafter, not just a 4-weekly scorecard sent to the passenger watchdog and the Secretary of State, because it's just not going to cut the mustard. That means API feeds of data such that user groups, mayoral strategic authorities, open access operators, freight operators can interrogate what is going on. So a lot of the devil will be in the detail. Look forward to the autumn.
So a little bit connected to the actual license itself is the policy for access and use. And you obviously must be looking for those legal baselines, should we call them, and those safeguards within that to make sure you're treated fairly. But how do you square off the idea that, if a minister is facing intense pressure, over delays on a busy western or eastern mainline route that shall remain anonymous here, can we honestly expect them not to push you guys out the way? And what do you want to see in that use policy?
No, I can't honestly expect that not to happen. That's what makes me concerned about this. And that's why I pick up on some of the phraseology in the Railways Bill and some of the clauses. Because, we don't want to be the poor relation, and we want to be able to demonstrate our value on a level playing field. Because other things equal, I hate to say it, but some services are more financially attractive than others, but not all services do as much for, looking at from my perspective, for cities. Urban journeys, London journeys, are short, have relatively a low level of fare compared to long distance high speed, and they're therefore not always as commercially attractive as other services. There are genuine trade-offs here, but we do need that access and transparency to data to enable us to determine this on as rational a basis as possible, rather than merely on GBR's commercial advantage. And that's what I want to see out of all this.
Yeah, I think just to add to that, I think the other piece which is crucial to bring investment in is the longevity of the access.
Yeah.
So historically, if we introduce and invest in brand new trains, that would give you a certainty that you'll have a 10-year track access to essentially get that payback on that investment. At the moment, the trend is now looking towards going to sort of 5-year plans, which potentially wouldn't give you the length of time to essentially go to your financiers to get the investment to bring in either new rolling stock or to make infrastructure investment. So we're pushing on that front, that actually we need certainty on the length of track access. And actually, it's not just us, it's that the whole community needs to understand, right, okay, what is the essentially the framework we're working within here? How much confidence do we have in this on the long term? And if there's the ability to then get back to a 10-year position, that will attract investment. The shorter the time period, the more difficult it is to get the investment through.
Yeah.
And I would absolutely agree with both colleagues there, both Stuart and Geoff there. I think absolutely key that we get the access and use policy built in with the safeguards that rail freight and non-GBR operators need in there. So the access and use policy is going to be the key document that outlines how GBR take access decisions. And that needs to build in safeguards in there to protect, to promote that investment from the private sector that will be crucial to build the growth and get the economic growth and decarbonisation that the government wants to see. So things like long-term access rights is going to be an absolute prerequisite for that, and we would expect to see a 10-year access contract by default under GBR as it is under the current framework. But then also beyond that, the continuity beyond those 10 years. So at the moment, the Network Rail operate on a strong presumption that when the access rights expire, they will not drop off a cliff, but they will go in. They'll be rolled forward into the next contract, and that presumption needs to carry on. So that's a continuity that investors will be looking for to make those investments to realise the growth. Appeals are going to be key here as well. We're touching on how this is going to work with the ORR. So we need to make sure the ORR has the powers, has the levers to be able to hold GBR to account. And I mean, I'm sure we'll touch on it, but there are areas of the bill at the moment where we have concerns and we're seeking clarification on to make sure that we have this workable, we have a transparent, and we have an appeals process that does build confidence.
So I guess, we look at that then as a whole. The role of the ORR is going to change, but away from that a little bit, what confidence do you have in the? I know it's early days, but what confidence do you have in that it's going to get right at the moment? The access and use policy will be exactly what you want it to be, and you mentioned trade-offs. You've all mentioned trade-offs in some ways. In a hypothetical world, what do they look like?
Well, shall I start? The particular clauses which we're most worried about, 66, 72, and 68. So 68 is the appeals to ORR, since that was a particular point in the question. And there, making appeals to the ORR will be much harder in the future. And the bar will be high, and the ORR will, this is my reading of it, the bar will be higher, and the ORR will need to demonstrate that any kind of appeal satisfies various legal criteria. And, GBR will be, to a greater extent than now, judge and jury. And at the moment, when I want to run more services on the national rail network, I have a credible threat with Network Rail that I can go to the ORR, and that will be much less credible in future. It's a credible threat, and it's worthwhile because it gives me some ability to say, you better be treating us fairly, because otherwise I can go onwards. And that, my hand will be weakened in the future, is my reading of the relevant clauses in the Railways Bill right now. So that is the nature of the debate that we're having, and why I'm keen to make sure that that is, the phraseology, which all seems so very intangible and arcane in the slightly hard work read that is the Railways Bill, really, really matters to well, people like us.
Yeah, and just to build on that, so I think with the ORR potentially going into this appeals role, I guess the concerns there is making sure that you've got the right resource. That's quite a different role to what they're currently doing at the moment. They've got a really good team, really skilled team, and it's trying to understand what's happening to those people. Are those people essentially going to be moving over to an appeals role where actually it could be quite a lumpy flow of work? There's question marks on how long the appeal process takes. And so it's just really understanding how would this actually get structured? How does this get resourced? And on the flip side, if actually that remit's then sitting in with the access sitting in with GBR, again, how's that getting resourced? How are we ensuring that we're getting the right people looking at it? Because I think, the ORR have built up some strong credibility in this area over a number of years, and it's really trying to understand, okay, well, what's it mean for the people? Where is the ORR going to be going with this? Because unfortunately, having a sort of an appeals piece sort of tacked onto the end of the process doesn't feel like you can just take the team today and put that into essentially a part of the organisation which isn't necessarily going to have the same flow of work that it does today.
Yeah. Yes, the key word is credibility, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I think it's, we've got to look at what's happening with the industry structure here. At the moment, the industry structure bakes in safeguards into the structure. You know, we've got separation of infrastructure management and train operation. Obviously, we turn that on its head under GBR. We've got an independent ORR taking access decisions. That's GBR themselves. So GBR will have skin in the game when it comes to access. And they're also the decision body when it comes to the approval of access. So the risk of a conflict of interest being created is very, very significant. And because of that changing structure, we need a more robust, a stronger ORR with more powers. And at the moment, we've got concerns that, as has been outlined by Geoff, that what's in the bill sees sort of a weakening of powers, and we need to see a appeals process that's workable, it's transparent, and gives confidence. And I think it's still a bit of work to do on there.
So, speaking about freight just for a second, and I think it's a comment that's been levelled regularly that for rail freight operators, you need that long-term certainty for investment, for locomotive investment, and obviously for terminal infrastructure as well, which is sometimes forgotten, that it's not all about the fleet on the tracks. It's about, when it happens, when it's in port. That may not exist when you don't have priority. But so what changes for freight right now? Sorry, what changes for freight that in the current environment that you have right now? What will change? And do you think much will change, or do you think there's much more change? It will stay the same?
Well, I think a lot will change. I think you're absolutely right to highlight the investment. The fact that investment is widespread. It's not just in the locomotives. It's in all the rolling stock. It's in people. It's in facilities up and down the country. So that absolutely that is absolutely the case. That's there. But I think we've got to also look at what the positivity is in the bill as well. So the bill, the policy direction for rail freight is actually fairly positive. We've got government that set a growth target to grow rail freight by at least 75% by 2050. We're expecting in the next few weeks another growth target to be announced, likely an interim target, a 2040 target. That might act as a stepping stone to get to 2050. So we've got a lot of momentum in the policy world to sort of see that modal shift from road to rail. That is absolutely core government policy. What we need to make sure is that does go into, that positivity then transcends into the bill. And to some extent, there are quite a few positives in the bill for rail freight. So there's going to be a statutory duty on GBR to promote the use of the network for freight. There's going to be an obligation to set growth targets. there's going to be GBR are going to have loads of levers to discount charges. They can discount charges for pretty much any reason that they want to in future. So again, those are all very, very good levers. We need to see those embedded into the actual policy framework, the documentation that will be the bedrock of how GBR actually operate day to day. And I guess that's where, you know, we've got to make sure that that positivity transcends into, you know, the AUP, the license, all those really important codes that are going to form the backdrop of how we engage with GBR going forward. And, you know, we talked about some of what we're looking for by way of safeguard, long-term access rights, an appeals body that we understand is reliable, that is predictable, that we, you know, that our investors have confidence in. All of those things are absolutely crucial. So I think we sort of know where we are. I think we, you know, I think as a sector, you know, we're working towards the same aspiration. We just need to make sure that what's the positive mood music does actually become, you know, policy direction when it's sort of put into practice.
And I guess it's a little bit similar for you, isn't it, Stuart, in terms of open access? You need that certainty, don't you, when it comes to long-term investment. I guess it's less to do with late-night slots for you, is it? But more to do with wrestling for the right slots on most of the mainline routes.
Yeah, well, we've always taken a sort of a view that, you know, we will fit in where there's capacity. So we've launched Lumo on the East Coast at some quite you know, out of peak times, I would say. We've got a 5:45 off King's Cross every day in the morning. We've got a service which is getting into King's Cross around midnight each day. So we work around the peripheries of the timetable, trying to work in our services where there is the capacity. Obviously, we'd love to have more slots at peak time, but we recognise that, you know, we need to be working around others. So we just want to make sure we've got a fair shot at being able to get to that access. Because once we get there, we think we've got a really good case study of how you can then build the market. You know, particularly what we've seen over the last 4.5 years, 5 years since the Lumo launch, we've rebuilt that market. And, you know, particularly that pre-6 a.m. market at King's Cross, where, you know, 5-10 years ago, it was very difficult to see how you get people travelling at that time. But actually, things have evolved. The you know, TfL networks evolved with you know, essentially a 24/7 operation. So we are open to be operating at the time of day. Obviously, we want to make sure the sort of core services is running to meet the passenger demand. But we're willing to work around others, and we expect to, you know, as I say, it's the key thing for us. It's just making sure we've got a fair crack at getting that access.
Geoff, I wanted to actually touch a little bit on devolved administrations. So, in the new world, who's going to be your boss? Is it still going to be TfL? Are you expecting it to be more tightly controlled by GBR? And how are you going to interact? Because obviously we talk about, and it's a model which that Manchester and Birmingham and Sheffield are all quite keen on, interacting with a closed network onto an actual mainline network. Are you seeing there's going to be fundamental shifts there?
So there are lots of stripes of devolved network, and there are all sorts of policy documents which have colourful graphics in them that describe different variations on the theme. The sorts of things that I've done in the past, you know, London Overground, Elizabeth Line, has been of the more full-blooded devolution kind, by which I mean that we, TfL, are in charge of fares policy. We set the fares tariff. Me, in my day job, set the timetable, albeit quite rightly, in coordination with Network Rail and all the other operators. I mean, the Mildmay line, North London line in old speak, more mixed traffic railway is hard to imagine, you know, in terms of the sheer variety of services. We share the Windrush line down to South London with lots of other operators as well. It's quite the work of art putting that little lot together. And then investment priorities is the other really big policy lever. Again, we TfL want to have a big say on that, and we TfL have the ability to lever London's money, by which I mean everything from local contributions through Section 106 through to retained business rates that we have through the Greater London Authority, etc., etc. And over the years, that's contributed literally billions to the National Rail network and its development. No surprise, therefore, that, sorry to repeat myself, that a quarter of all National Rail trips are on TfL operators, the Overground and Elizabeth line. So the object of an exercise of all this is to help achieve Mayor's Transport Strategy Policy 1. And it's Policy 1 for a reason. That is to get sustainable mode share, public transport, walking and cycling up a lot, to 80% by 2040. It's 63 now, and it was about 50 20 years ago. And the reason why it's gone up quite as much, there are lots of them, but probably the biggest single reason, give or take, is the fact that the railway networks in London have got wildly more popular over the course of that 20 years. So they should have done, because we put a lot of money into them. We've spent a lot of money, and that's the return we get. We are anxious to protect all that because we think we've done some very valuable things to make the heavy rail transport network as relevant as possible to that urban framework and to making London work as possible. And we've done that in the context of still being able to square it off against the very many freight operators on the Mildmay line, North London line, the very many other passenger operators on the Windrush line, etc., etc. So to go back to your question, we are anxious to maintain that control because we think it brings the integration that is best practice in urban transport, and it enables us to have a real say. Somebody has to have, in any kind of devolution, the last word. When things are going well, these are all grand. When things are going badly, somebody has to have the last word. And we are anxious in the urban context and for the trips for which we're responsible, that it is us and not imposed upon us still.
So I want to actually, just a couple of questions on infrastructure. Obviously, you guys, for freight, open access, and for TfL, you use the network, and you pay into the network. Do you have concerns that the rate of investment in infrastructure and asset management that is going to be needed for Network Rail, or GBR as it comes, are you concerned that that is not going to match the ambitions of the network for you guys?
So I'll go first from a freight perspective. Absolutely, I think that is a concern. We've obviously got growth targets that have been set. Those growth targets will require additional freight services to operate over sort of key congested parts of the network today. I'll take an example of London Gateway, the port at London Gateway, which has seen a significant expansion over the past couple of years. We've seen a huge movement of volume into London Gateway. But now, for all intents and purposes, all of the rail slots from London Gateway are full. It's operating at capacity. But we have a port investing there in additional berths 5 and 6 will come on stream in the next few years. There's a new rail terminal opening at the port, likely next year. But obviously the elephant in the room is then where's the capacity on the network to be able to sort of move the volume of goods that are going to be needed to sort of move in and out that port. And these are goods that drive economic growth for the country. They're goods that sort of drive UK PLC. And we move them in a sustainable manner. So we have to have a plan that can help unlock and realise that growth. I think a growth target is great. I think that provides a sort of the North Star, that sort of guiding light. I think having the interim target that I mentioned before that's likely to be a 2040 target actually means that target then bites a lot sooner. Mm-hmm. And that's really important because the infrastructure we're planning today is that which needs to be done to deliver the 2040 target. It feels like a long way away. It's really not when it comes to, as you'll know from from infrastructure planning. Yeah. So we're going to have to start planning what that infrastructure looks like. Clearly, we know budgets are tight, but we need to consider what the railway's doing and delivering and how it is enabling those sort of wider objectives to be met. You know, and as a nation, we need to kickstart economic growth, and you know, and the railways are a key way of facilitating that.
Yeah, I think just to build on that, we know that transport is going to be competing with a number of other critical areas for funding. So I think it's on us to be looking at what else can we be doing to ease that burden, and that's where we've been really active with Network Rail and Hitachi in recent months, exploring what we can do with battery electric operation. We've made a sizable investment into new fleet. We sort of announced £500 million of new trains and maintenance contracts in the end of 2024, and we're looking at those, of which is 14 train units, and we're looking within those 14 train units, can a number of those be battery electric trains, which would then ease the burden on things like power supply upgrades. We know that there's constraints on the West Coast Main Line. We've just started a new operation on the West Coast between Stirling, Preston and London 3 weeks ago, but we're running diesel operation. It's electrified the whole way, but it's power supply constraints. So we're looking at, okay, well, if we move over to a battery electric train, can we use that battery power to navigate where the power supply constraints? Can we also then look at running a battery electric train where we don't have the overhead wires, and how and what sort of range can we then get out of it, and then ultimately bringing electrification to a wider community without having to do the same level of infrastructure investment. So we're actively looking at how we can take that forward. But yeah, I think we just got to recognise there's going to be a challenge on infrastructure spending. It's then looking at how we can use the technology to look at things differently.
Yeah, asset health is a big deal. It's a big deal for the TfL network, and it's a big deal for the Network Rail one. Every now and again, my organisation makes me director on call, and that means I look very, very closely at all the incidents which are ongoing. Occasionally you have to do something. A particular example over the last couple of years has been Gunnersbury Junction. Now, it's one junction, one amongst many, but it just fails rather more often than any of us would care to believe. And earlier on, Lord Hendy was discussing the fact that if he can get cancellations down and T to 3 up, then it has such a big impact on usage and, by extension, fares income. It's absolutely the same for us, absolutely. So all the crumbling edge of quality, as somebody once called it many years ago, you see it in all sorts of areas, and we're absolutely anxious to try and ensure that we head that off at the pass. COVID ran a coach and horses through lots and lots of organisations' finances, ours included. And the easiest thing in the world is to reduce your renewals spend, but it comes back to bite you time and again. And getting renewals up and getting our assets healthier, in better condition, and failing less often. And indeed, the other element to that is the speed of response. If you're in an urban context and you've got literally hundreds of thousands of trips every day crossing Gunnersbury Junction, to take my example, it's really incumbent upon to get those maintenance people out there PDQ when it does go wrong. So yeah, it's a big deal.
So it's question time. There will be a roving mic in and around the arena. If you want to pop your hand up if you've got a question, name and company, and we'll take it from there.
Hi, Michael Colella from CPCS. Geoff and I used to work together at TfL and Rail, and one of the things that I remember quite well, which you kind of talked about, is as things change, like creating the overground, but also expanding the overground, change is one of the most important things that you did all touch upon. And obviously, the new bill and how the process will work is going to be, we're not going to be just holding it still. Growth in freight, open access intercity rail, and then obviously expansion and improvements in TfL's network. The one thing, though, that all three of you didn't talk about, you talked a lot about protection, your worries about how effectively GBR becoming more responsible for everything, and so therefore the worries about the protection. You didn't talk about that actually the current process itself is long-winded, complicated, and OOR really doesn't necessarily intervene as much as you might want them to do, because getting an extra path, for instance, the Shepherd's Bush additional services, how long did that take you to get that done? So the question probably is, if you think protection is important, no doubt about it, and the process and the change is going to be really important. But how about, is there a practical thing that all three of you can think about which would actually mean that the GBR process, if GBR is going to be responsible for this going forward, that you will have more trust in it and it becomes a more impartial process, so you don't have to go to ORR, as you said, because the threshold will be really potentially very, very high. So in a way, almost flip the discussion from what protections do you want to actually what do you want the process to actually be done, so therefore it's better for you.
Shall I kick off, since Michael mentioned those Shepherd's Bush additional trains on 17th of May, which introduced. And there we had what's the right phrase, a full and frank discussion with my colleagues at Network Rail about the utility of those trains and the impact that they asserted may or may not occur in terms of the performance and reliability of the network, with some of which I disagreed. But what the process currently allowed me is to say, all right then, if you don't want to do it, I'll see you at the ORR. So it gave me credibility. And why I bang on about protections is because of precisely that experience roughly this time last year, which is fresh in the mind, and from my perspective came out with a perfectly good outcome, namely I was able to introduce them. NR got what they wanted, that we will look very hard at how they are going, what impact, if any, they're having on performance and reliability, and we'll think hard in due course, once there's a certain track history, about whether they're the sorts of things which are going adequately well, or whether we want to do something different in the future. So it is that credibility, and I do worry that the conflict of interest stroke judge and jury syndrome that we are building into the Railways Bill will make my life materially harder in this kind of regard. That's why I focus on that.
So I think that was a good question, and I think what we're being told about how GBR will make access decisions in the future regime is that they will make access decisions based on best use. That's what the bill says. We don't know what best use means at this point. That needs to be worked through. But if we take that at face value, that there will be methodology behind how do we maximize the value of the network by whatever the parameters are that we're judging that against, and there is a robust and transparent process in place. And then that process then filters down to what they're calling the ICPs, those infrastructure capacity plans. And we're going to have ICPs across the network, which is going to give rise to the access rights that then flow through. You can see how that process could be improved, is an improved process on the current one, assuming that we have confidence in that process going throughout. But as Geoff said, the backstop has to be the ability to appeal that, and we need to ensure that the regulator has the powers and has the remedies and has the tools in place, that when it doesn't go right, when processes haven't been followed, there is that backstop, and that backstop has to be real.
Just to add, it does create opportunity, and one of the things I've really been pushing and hoping that in a GBR environment we can get to is actually the services match the passenger demand. So we've been very traditional in the railways with regards to you have the same timetable Monday to Friday, but passenger movements, customer movements aren't the same from Monday to Friday. In fact, they're very, very different from one day to the next. You compare a Friday to a Wednesday, very, very different market. So I do think there's potential then to see a bit of a radical rethink on that day-to-day timetabling, which potentially creates a number of opportunities.
Yes, this gentleman here.
Yeah, Nigel Otway, former access manager for DB Cargo. I've worked quite closely with Peter in the past. Peter mentioned earlier, right at the start, it's crucial, obviously, that the network license that GBR will have needs the right protections in it, and that one of those protections should be that GBR isn't allowed to compete, in other words, with the freight operators. But one of the biggest customers of most of the freight operators is currently Network Rail. Has there been any discussions about ensuring that Network Rail isn't going to source its own engineering work fleet and therefore take a lot of business away from the freight operators by owning its own locomotives?
Yeah, so it's a good question, Nigel. So the ask that I outlined, or the requirement or obligation that I outlined in line with the licenses, that GBR will not be competing for commercial freight traffic. So we're not talking SCO here, because at the moment, Network Rail are not precluded from operating their own SCO trains. So as I understand it, that would be putting a restriction on GBR that doesn't currently exist on Network Rail, and that might not be appropriate in terms of ratcheting that up. I absolutely agree that the work that the freight operators do for Network Rail is important, and it's work that the freight operators will want to carry on doing for GBR going forward. But there isn't a restriction on Network Rail today to operate their own services from an infrastructure perspective.
No, that's right. But one of the things that they will have in future that they don't have now is drivers to drive those locomotives. Yep. So using passenger operator drivers at weekends to do the engineering works. Yep. Because at the moment, they obviously rely on the freight operators to provide drivers for the freight locos that they hire for the engineering work. So it should be a big concern for all the freight operators that their biggest customer may have the means to take away a lot of business.
Yeah, it's not lost upon us that at all, Nigel, in that sense. I think the way, obviously, the commercial freight market works with SCO, they work very much in tandem, of course, where, during the downtime of the commercial freight traffic, the resources can then step up to do the infrastructure work for Network Rail. And that synergy that exists there will carry on being a synergy going for GBR. And therefore, what those assets are, how they're deployed, where they are in the country, where's the route knowledge for those drivers? We're talking here about shifts that run through the night. They're very much aligned to the sort of commercial work that they're doing. The drivers are doing sort of Monday to Friday in that sense, doing similar hours at weekends. You can see a risk, and absolutely not lost upon us. But I think from an efficiency and productivity point of view, I think it would, I think freight's got to back itself there, that we will still be absolutely competitive in that market.
Last question. Yes, gentleman at the front.
Yes, thank you very much. And I was glad to hear what the ex-GB cargo man said as well. It is very curious that the alternative of a straightforward keeping the ORR, Office of Rail Regulation, for one purpose, which was open access and freight, and also what you've discussed in London, which I wasn't aware of, has been replaced by this idea that GBR should be the regulator. There is a term which you may know called, I think it's called self-service, whereby the infrastructure operator is also supplying rail services, and it's competing, also providing infrastructure for other rail services, and that's Germany. And I wonder, Peter, whether your experience comes up here, because in Germany they have DB running freight. Also, there is lots of private freight operators. Yep. And I'm sure Freightliner has plenty of experience of this there. Do you see, and from what Stuart said, is that this system may fall down and the minister may say, well, this is a mistake and we should simply let ORR be the regulator of access from freight. But is the German experience at all useful here, where you have both the operator, the infrastructure manager running services and supposedly giving fair access to others?
Yeah, and I think we've all mentioned at some point the need for a regulator with teeth and with real powers. And at the moment, the bill does envisage that the ORR will stay as the appeal body. I think, I know I sense your scepticism there, that those powers have to be real, they have to be deployable, they have to have teeth, and it can't just remit it back to GBR. They have to have the ability to make directions, to actually make directions on GBR to do something positive in that sense. Your comment on Germany, Germany has gone through that liberalisation of the market in a way where we're obviously going the opposite direction now through the creation of GBR. That's the opposite model of to Germany. And obviously with the three of us on the panel who will still be non-GBR operators operating in that model, absolutely can't get lost on that then. And therefore, the need for that strong regulator and those protections becomes more important in the future model than it does in the current model. Because we are losing those baked-in protections. We're losing what we have today by way of the inbuilt safeguards. And therefore, we need to replicate them in the way, the ORR stands up and steps up and, and the powers it really has. Possibly, it's still got the Lords to go through the legislation, so we'll see what it comes out with. Yeah.
I'm afraid we are out of time. Thank you very much, everybody, and thank you very much to our panellists.
Thank you.